right. Here we are, a little bit late, but better late than never. My name is DaShaun Carter. I'm a Spring developer advocate, and today we're all lucky. We are all in a good spot because my good friend Thomas is here. Thomas, how are you doing?
Hello, everyone. I'm doing good.
For
Thanks. How are you?
those of us that don't know you, why don't you give a little introduction?
Yeah, my name is Thomas. I'm 23 years old. I'm from Germany, and I'm a Spring developer.
Spring
Obvious here.
developer advocate.
I'm not an advocate yet.
Yes, you are. Yes, you are. You might not work for VMware, but you are definitely a Spring developer advocate.
Oh, okay, that's cool. Yeah, and I'm active on a conference, and I'm doing open source libraries, and yeah, all around full stack with Spring.
And you've been a wonderful part of the Spring office hours community, and I'm just super happy that you're here. And I'm happy that everybody's here. If you're here, let us know where you're from. Say hello in the chat. And yeah, what we normally like to do is kind of review what's going on in the ecosystem. So I'm going to add a little bit. What's been going on with you, Thomas? How is your week getting off? How's it getting off to a good start or no?
It's all right. I'm going to the Java user group in Paderborn on Wednesday. I'm holding my talk there.
Wait, which talk are you going to do?
I'm going to do joyful server-side full-stack web development.
That sounds super interesting, and maybe a little bit about kind of what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah.
You think you can maybe give us a little like intro? I'm going to go over here to calendar. Let's take a quick peek at what's coming. What's come out. I'm going to add this real quick. Let's add this to the stream. Can I get a different view? Maybe not that one. I want this one to jump up. Here, let's do this. There we go. Let's check that out. So it's August 7th. This is episode 47. No releases last week. We had STS4 that came out. And the only thing that's coming out this week is we have a new Spring Cloud release milestone version. Next week, there's a lot of stuff on the plate. Next week, a lot of stuff's coming out. But nothing like that's on my radar. Nothing in the projects that I'm using. I'm not looking for any new releases. So yeah, I know that Spring Boot 3.1.3 is coming around later this month. And Spring Boot 3.2, I believe, has another milestone coming out.
Yep.
So yeah, we're looking good. Things are moving forward.
As always.
Look at this. Hello, everybody. We got Alexander, hello, and Maelstrom. Wonderful. Thanks for joining. Things are happening. Tell me this. I'm gonna hide this one. Tell me, what are you working on? Like what things are active for you right now? What are some of the interesting things you're working
on? So last week I did a stream with Josh, and I was working on the native.
Yes.
For a Spring V component, so the native support. Still have to integrate that, but I think I'm going to do that at the end of the week. But yeah, other than that, not much going on.
The Coffee Software channel. I think I have a link, or I'll try to throw that link in here. Integrating Spring View component with.
Yeah,
I got it. So I'm going to put that link because it was a good session. And there's a lot of stuff. He did some other shows.
Yeah, Josh does awesome content always.
Oh, let me find this.
Yeah.
But I'll put that in.
What are you doing?
Good. It's conference season for us. Like it's getting pretty crazy over here. And the chat the link I just put in, that's the link to that episode that you did with Josh on coffee and software. But right now, I'm getting ready for Spring 1. Spring 1 is right around the corner. Are you going to be joining us at Spring 1?
Sadly not. I thought about putting my talk in, but the deadline was after the Spring I/O conference.
Yep.
Or before that, and I wanted to first look if I really want to do another talk, but yeah. But I've put my talk at DevVox and JFall, so maybe there.
Yeah. Spring 1 is what we're getting ready for. It's getting really packed. I heard some rumors that, it's going to be the biggest event that we've done. And yeah, that's what I'm getting ready for. So I'm trying to get all of my demos and stuff ready so that I can stand them up, tear them out, stand them up, tear them down. All the things that you find in everything that you're doing as you go through that process. One of the other things that I've been spending quite a bit of time in is some of these demos, the demos that I like to do and like to share, I don't want to be the only one that's sharing them. So I try to set up my demos. I try to make it so that my notes are in Markdown so anybody can go and copy them. And then I try to make it so that anybody else can go and take my talk or my demo and they can go and deliver it themselves. So one of the things that I spent quite a bit of time on last week was just kind of cleaning up. You want that quick start so that it's easy for somebody to take and do your demo. So I spent a lot of time just kind of getting feedback, treating these demos kind of like a product because I want other people to go out and use them. So that's what I've been spending my time on. That's what I spent a lot of time on last week. And this week, it's all about Spring on Kubernetes. And I'm just taking it a tiny step further. I'm using a product called Flux CD, which it's all about GitOps. So where I'm at right now is I can destroy a Kubernetes cluster, the one that I run on my daily driver machine. I can destroy the Kubernetes cluster, and then I rebuild it. I run 2 commands, and 4 minutes later, I have all of the things that I want deployed on my local laptop are deployed, and I can just start doing my development. So I have this idea of multi-tenant Kubernetes cluster, which is an interesting topic all by itself, where I've got different projects, or you have different products inside of your company. How do you separate? How do you deploy them without giving everybody their own cluster? How do you manage the roles and access and all that kind of stuff? How do you give them access? You want to give some a bit of they can do it themselves, some self-service, but then you don't want to give too much. So there's kind of a fine line in how your organization sets that line. Where they set that line is an important part of what determines how fast you get to go. So yeah, that's what I've been working on.
Sounds awesome.
We haven't got you going on Kubernetes yet, and that's okay. We're still.
I'm still a Docker Compose guy. So,
and that works. There's a lot of things that are running on Kubernetes that would be just fine on Docker Compose.
Yeah. My colleague at work, he's writing a book on GitOps.
Oh, wonderful.
A German one.
Yeah.
And he has to do Docker Swarm at work, and he's always like, "Oh, these people, why do they not use Kubernetes?" And I'm like, if this guy does my Kubernetes clusters, I don't care,
Yep.
but because he can do it. But for my daily work, I think, if I have to self-manage a Kubernetes clusters aside from my daily work, it's so much stuff to do. So yeah.
Yep, it is, and that's why the GitOps approach really helps. So that's where I'm spending time. It's kind of I'd like to get more confidence and get more reps in what I'm doing. I think that's typical for this role and for a lot of people in this community, is getting a chance to take it a step further. And you know what? Actually, I'm happy to show off what I've been doing. So yeah, we'll give a second, and then we'll jump into what you're doing. So I'm going to go here, and I will show kind of what we're doing. So one of my teammates, Lee, he actually helped. I got a little bit of bootstrap. So the idea here is you have different clusters that you can set up. So I've got multiple clusters running around my house. This is kind of a new revision, but I can basically say on this machine, these are the things I want to install. And I still want to get a different view. Hold on one second. I'm going to switch this out. For those of you that are listening on the...
You're gone.
I said, oh yeah. I was trying to say for those of us that are on the podcast, I'm going through just kind of this flux control pattern that I picked up, and I got a little bootstrap from Lee. So for each of my clusters, I can set up different configurations. So in this one, this Juice Docker desktop, it's going to install the Flux system, everything it needs to run Flux. And then also it's going to install Cloudflare D. So that's kind of the ingress where I don't have to port forward anything. It's going to connect up to Cloudflare where my DNS happens, and I can start sending traffic directly to this Raspberry Pi cluster. But then also kind of the underlying infrastructure that I might want to exist for all of the applications. So this is where I'll put in my my policy management, my updates, my agents, and all that kind of stuff. So it's a slow process, but baby steps.
Yeah.
And then from there, I can install my tenants. So on this cluster, I'm saying, hey, I want this tenant called DaShaun-dev to be installed. And then in this other tenant, which will be on the same cluster in their own namespace, I want to install this tenant, springofficehours.io. And those map to GitHub repositories, GitHub organizations. So I can show you that. So if I go to github.com/DaShaun-dev, each one of these organizations is just going to have a Flux repository. So you can see that the organization name matches to that tenant name. So I can have some kind of consistency, that convention, so I could expand this out. And then inside of there, it's just customizations. So I have one customization file that says, hey, these are the things that I want to deploy in this namespace. So no matter, it doesn't have to know where the cluster is. My cluster, my Flux CD is doing the management. It's saying, hey, this is going to be deployed to these namespaces, but the app team, that organization, doesn't care. The idea where I shouldn't care where it's going, just knowing that, hey, something is running, and there should be kind of a feedback loop. I should know, hey, where's my logs, my metrics, etc. That's kind of the next step, is making sure that, hey, it's deployed, or is it deployed? Like, where do you get your status? Connecting all those dots to kind of have this, yeah, nice flavor of deploying applications. And because I'm doing a lot of stuff with Raspberry Pi, it gives me a way to deliver all different types of apps and orgs and namespaces to all this different infrastructure, all based on Git. So the management, I guess a fun little demo here would be to kind of show it off.
Yeah, everything should be based on Git, basically.
So I'm going to show this real quick. I'm going to say, hey, look, I've got, this is my cluster. Right now you can kind of see that Kubernetes and Knative serving is what I use. Flux, and then it's got the ingress. There's actually some other services deployed here, but they're scaled to 0. So I'm going to show you what this looks like real quick. This is exactly what I've been working on for these Spring workloads. So I'm going to go over here. I'm going to reset my Kubernetes cluster. So everything's gone. Reset it, just delete it. It's okay because I've got everything in Git. The process of getting it back up is not that big of a deal. So as soon as that comes up, yeah, I don't need to show anything else. I can close these guys. That's going to come up here in just a sec. Yeah, we can terminate that. And yeah, so this is just deleting it. This is Kubernetes running on Docker desktop. And I just want to wipe it clean. I want to repave the whole thing. So first it's going to get rid of all the stuff. And then when it's done, it's going to start it back up, but it'll be empty. There's not going to be anything deployed there except for the Kubernetes infrastructure, that the APIs that are running Kubernetes, the system of Kubernetes is going to be there. And I didn't expect it to take this long, but so now it's going to say, hey, yeah, we're going to start that. So now it's starting, but now I can jump over here and I can show K9s is a tool that you can use to connect to different Kubernetes clusters. Okay, things are starting to come up. So that's great. I'm going to jump. I have another project over here, my Flux control project that I showed. So now Kubernetes is up. I'm going to run a couple of commands here just to show the idea of being able to repave and send new things. So I've got 2 commands. Hey, deploy some secrets so I can connect to Cloudflare and it's got that access. And then the other one is just like, oh, go do the Flux thing. Like, go install all the things. So Flux kicks off and we can actually just watch it as it's going. So now, hey, Flux is running, it's doing its thing. It's installing the Flux system that has its watchers so it can watch those front-end repositories. Yeah, Michael says, yeah, hey guys, I thought we were doing front-end. We're going to get to that front-end. I'll be showing one demo and then we'll get there. So this is what's happening. It's going. But Michael makes a great point. Like, let's talk about the front end. This is what I do. We'll see here in a second. It'll set up the login, the metrics, and it'll set up a couple of domains. But you're right, Michael. Let's get back to it.
That's the front end that DaShaun likes.
Yes,
CLI.
I'm sending everything. This is for all the websites. Like, be able to deploy. Like, once you get a front end, you still got to get it to production somewhere, right? So that's what we're doing. But let's talk about front ends. Like, what are some of the options when you think Spring Boot?
I got a good T-shirt for that.
I have one of those T-shirts. Well, actually, I don't have that one. I got a slightly different one. But yeah, great. So
yeah, I got that
Thomas,
at JCon.
yeah, showed us his nice Vaadin T-shirt. What are your experiences with Vaadin?
I didn't have any yet, so I've looked at it. I've talked a lot with Simon Martinelli. He's a big Vaadin user.
Yeah.
But the thing with Vaadin is you build your UIs using Java DSLs, and I don't understand why you would do that. So I think if you're building for the web, you should be staying as close as possible to your HTML.
Yep.
Because in the end, the browser renders HTML. So it's nice because it's all type safe and stuff. But even like Kotlin has also an HTML DSL, but I've never used it because it's going to be ending up in HTML anyway. So that's why I like to stay close with HTML.
So I don't know if you've seen this. This is where I go, and this is what I think of. So this is kind of my default path for front ends with Spring. I went to start.vaadin.com, which it looks like it's using the Spring initializer on the back end, but it gives you some ability. I'll see if maybe I can log in. It gives you some ability to, configure your front end. So you can do some really interesting things. It's got a bunch of views already. So out of the box, you get a hello world and about, but you can just add views from the top. And then the output, you have a nice way. Yes, look at JitterTed says, yep, I agree. Suffering through GWT.
Every older person, I have to say, not old, but older person, older than me, every time I talk about how like we're gonna do server-side rendering and full stack again with Spring and everything, every time they bring up, I've suffered with GWT.
Yes, there's this pendulum of like where we decide to put things. So when I started my career a long time before you did, the pendulum was like, hey, we're doing all this cool stuff in the front end in JavaScript, but JavaScript was really young. So things were breaking and people were hacking it, and it was really hard to make it consistent. So then I kind of shifted back where we're going to generate all the HTML in the back end. And it worked. And hey, we're doing like things, JSP was a thing, but we're doing other ways of generating that HTML in the back end. But then again, that pendulum kind of shifted back. And oh no, we got all these cool frameworks in JavaScript. And then now again, I feel like that pendulum is starting to shift back, and we're hearing more and more about this server-side rendered.
Actually, Vaadin is not server-side rendered.
Right.
It's a single-page application. But the big Simon told me that the big benefit of Vaadin is the huge component library. So like at my current job, we're doing like we have this form builder. But instead, if we would use Vaadin, for example, we wouldn't have to have all this pain. And it would be much better because you have all these components.
Yep.
But in that itself, you're limited because you have these predefined components for like a back office application. It's very nice. But if you have something consumer facing, well, you need to build your own components anyway. And the thing with Vaadin is you either use these components, or if you want to build your own, it's process, right? And if you're doing something HTML based, there's so many component libraries for HTML out there. So that's one benefit, I would say. But it has its use cases as everything.
Like for me, for what I do, the quick start, that MVP, we can spend a lot of time cycling on what's the best thing and how to do things, but there's a lot of value in getting something out the door. And I like this tool a lot. I've been using it a lot more lately. And you talked about the components I'm showing on the screen. You can do, there's a hello world, there's dashboards, cards, lists. But with their paid version, there's maps and spreadsheets and a lot of cool things you can do.
Yeah.
And you can kind of like build that framework here and then go get started. Just like we are used to doing with the start.spring.io initializer. So I like it a lot. What are some other options? What are some other things that you think about when you think about front end with Spring Boot?
So from the company that does Vaadin, there's also Hilla. That's also very interesting, and Hilla is a single page application and with a Spring Boot backend, and they have a React front end or a lit front end. And the nice thing with that is you define endpoints, and then it like auto generates all the TypeScript code for you. So it generates the classes for interacting with your API. It generates the API clients, and you can call that from a TypeScript frontend. So I didn't use it yet. I would like to, but no time.
Yeah, I get it.
Yeah.
But for now, I think because of where you sit in the ecosystem, I think there's a lot of value here in understanding like what's on your radar. Just because where you said, I think you've got a unique perspective. So yeah, it is definitely a tool, and I've watched Josh do videos, and I've watched how it works, so I understand. And I'm also still a big fan of the AOT stuff. The one thing I don't know is if I've done or if I've seen a Hilla with native combination. So I don't know that. I know my Vaadin stuff, I was able to do that. I know you worked on yours last week, but getting to that native AOT image, that's an important part of what I'm trying to do. So that's a big part for me. That's a big checkbox for me. What else is on your radar?
So my own stuff. So what I'm doing is server-side rendering with Htmx, and what I've been looking at is all these server-side Java, mostly Java template engines, because that's where the core of it is. You get HTML out of the door with a template engine. Like there's the Spring. I gotta say the start of Spring.io is really. It doesn't have the cool template engines. There's what's it called? Apache FreeMarker. There's JMustache. But the thing is with Spring, the template engines are first-class citizen. I gotta say they're not really that popular, and so there's better template engines nowadays. For example, JStachio is a type-safe compiled Mustache implementation, or what I've been and I've currently integrated Thymeleaf. That's not type-safe. It's also in the start.spring.io.
Yep.
And it has really nice integration with Spring. Like there's for example, for security, you can access the security context authentication directly in your templates, and that has also drawbacks, I think.
What would those drawbacks? First of all, let me back up.
Yeah.
Htmx.
Sorry.
Htmx. George had said, "Yay, Htmx." Describe Htmx for us.
Okay. What Htmx does is it extends HTML as a hypermedia. So if you think about HTML, you have links and you have forms, because in the olden days where JavaScript did not exist yet, you could interact with the server without any JavaScript because there was no JavaScript. So a hypermedia is your server sends the information, so your presentation of the information and the interactions that your client can do with it. So if you think about normal HTML, it's an anchor tag. You can navigate on your application with an anchor tag, and with a form element, you can do transactions to your server because it can create post requests. And what Htmx does, it extends that. So you can not only do get requests with an anchor tag, and you can do post requests with a form tag. You can do that with every tag. You can do that with any event. And the big thing is that makes it very. You can swap out the HTML. So what you can do is you can trigger a request. For example, you create a request to your backend where you, for example, a to-do list. You delete an item from your to-do list, and what you do is you don't, like with normal HTML, you would re-render the whole page. So you would have a refresh. Mm-hmm. And what you can do with HTML is only re-render the tasks. So what you do is you delete this item from the task list, or for the to-do list, and then you send back they hold only the to-do list and swap that out dynamically without a page refresh.
Interesting.
So that's the whole stick. You can do dynamic interaction. You only need this library, but you don't need to touch any JavaScript. Let's see. Yeah, what JetJet says. More interactive apps.
More interactive apps without going full SPA and let the server generate the HTML.
Yeah,
that was good. I liked your explanation of being able to do Git post with any element.
Yeah,
that resonated with me. That's good.
Yeah, and another interesting thing is if you think about REST, like everyone calls their JSON API nowadays calls them RESTful, but they actually don't. There's this Richardson REST maturity model, and the highest level of API maturity is actually called HDOS, Hypermedia as the engine of application state. And there's the Spring HDOS project that does that, but the problem with that is it usually uses JSON. And with HDOS, so what it says is Hypermedia as the engine of application state. That means that you always send the interactions from your backend to your front end, and then in this case, your client is just a browser. And the problem with like these JSON-based libraries is that you split the presentation of your information and your interaction, and that doesn't make much sense. And that's where Htmx comes in, because when you send HTML across the wire, you send the presentation and the interaction, and that makes it really nice, because it's really a big thing on Htmx is locality of behavior. So all your stuff is local. Yeah, I've not gotten to testing Htmx yet.
Oh boy.
You gotta show me to the TED sometime.
Yep. We'll have to get there.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Yeah. Well, good thing I prepped a presentation for the Java user group.
Yeah, so you're ready. Like you have it all. It's right top of mind. This is great. Do you want to show anything?
Yeah, I can show you some stuff.
That'd be great.
Just give me a second.
We're lucky. So this has been fun, and for us, for the people that have been in the community for a while, you brought this up early on. You've been working on it for a long time.
Yeah, I think so. Actually, Wim de Blauwe got me started on server-side rendering, because I went through the whole pain of creating a single-page application. So my first real big Spring Boot project was a customer side for data recovery, and I've built that with Angular and with Spring Boot backend. And the hassle of like doing all that stuff, you have to create TypeScript classes, you have to create Java classes, you have to create an API client, and all that stuff. It was so complex, and I've put a post about it. I wanted to update. Like, I didn't upgrade the Angular project for a year, only a year. And the list of changes I had to do was like, it didn't fit on the screen. It's on Twitter. It's like so long. So it was really, it's insane.
Yeah.
Angular is actually, I've grown up on it.
I get it.
It's nice, but you have all the same issues you have with all single page applications. Yeah. So that's where I came in. So Wim he is like the father of Thymeleaf, basically. He has a book on it, Taming Thymeleaf, it's called. And that's really nice book. But the thing I actually talked with Oliver and Wim on Twitter about, like, okay, it has a Thymeleaf with Spring, has like these different issues, and the thing is, it's because Spring is not really a full stack framework; it's a backend framework. They don't consider themselves a full stack framework, in my opinion, because like the Spring MVC, it didn't really evolve over the last decade, I think. Like you have the model, view, and controller. I've looked at like Spring 2. something, and how you do model, view, controller is the same as it was 10 years ago, 20 years ago. I couldn't figure out exact number, But that's like the thing, and it's not really evolved with like all these front end advantages that like these single page application frameworks have. It didn't really evolve, and that's what I'm trying to do with my library.
Yeah.
Spring View component, it's called.
So I'm going to ask a couple of questions. This is Jitter Ted says, as long as a long Thymeleaf and server-side generated HTML fan, it's great to see things like Htmx becoming popular. And yeah, I think, in my head, Thomas, you're kind of at that front, at least for the Spring community, doing a lot of interesting things. And I want to ask a question. I definitely lean into the back end, and I've got, these models for how I'm delivering front end apps. And yeah, a lot of times my front end kind of has a Spring Boot wrapper around it. So whether it's Ionic or Angular or React or whatever, I'm still delivering it inside of a Spring Boot app, so I can get things like metrics, and I can put it into a container easily. And I can do like service discovery. I can connect it to all the other things like config. How do I do those things? How do I do those cloud native things with other frameworks? If I wasn't doing that with Spring Boot, how might I do that? What are some other options? Or like, hey, I'm going to deploy this front end app in this environment. In this environment, it's got this URL. How might I go about feeding in those things to other applications in other frameworks?
You mean other other backend frameworks? You mean?
Yeah. Well, and I'm trying to argue the point about Spring being full stack and how it gives me this flexibility to do things for my back end and my front end.
Yeah, you can you can deliver, like, in the end, JavaScript is are only files that you serve. So in the end, it's just your embedded Tomcat or Netty or whatever you use just returns the HTML files and the JavaScript files, and then that connects to your Spring Boot backend.
Yeah, and I've delivered like just without even a sort of just Nginx, right? Hey, here's the files. You can go to that and put it into an Nginx container, and it's serving up all of the pages. Because then you get some interesting things like but your proxy and HTTPS and all that kind of things. You can do that with Nginx as well. But what I didn't get, I had to then configure, during build time. I couldn't do it at runtime, so I had to have different containers configured different ways for different environments.
I would argue that with like server-side rendered, you're more flexible, because in the end it's only a Spring. It's actually an API. It's just an API.
Yep.
So you're more flexible, I would say. And what I've also I didn't get around to it, but what I wanted to discover was if you put your front end as a microservice.
Mm-hmm.
So you have your Spring Boot app in your microservice cluster or something.
Yep.
And what you do is you take that app and put it as an input to your cluster. And then with for example, I wanted to do it with the declarative HTTP clients, because you can share these across your microservices.
Yep.
And then connect that little microservice that delivers your server-side rendered page and connect them with Spring. So everything is Spring. Everything. Yep. And that makes it, I'm thinking it makes it very nice. I didn't get around to it, but that's something I wanted to discover.
That is a great idea, and I'm following your thought track right there. Here's Michael says, snippets may remind you of Hotwire for Ruby on Rails or Symfony UX Turbo, but Netty came up with them 14 years earlier.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's like you take a step back. You think about, okay, what if we went back 10 years ago when React was first introduced? What could we have done differently? What if instead of this whole JavaScript hellhole we're all in as like backend first developers, what could we have done differently? And to the point, I've read a lot from DHH, the creator of Ruby on Rails. Like, his whole view on the thing is like he established the Hotwire Ruby on Rails framework. And the thing that you get with like the server-side rendered web applications is that you get a productivity boost like nothing else. because what they do at I think the company is called the product is called Hey. It's like an email client or something.
Yep.
And what they do is they have 2-person team. One is a designer that can create HTML. They don't do Figma or something like that, but instead the designer creates the HTML. And then the backend or the full stack developer, I have to say, then just fills that data with the Ruby on Rails template engine or whatever it is. And with their Hotwire framework, they have the interactivity. And that makes them so productive because you remove so much complexity.
Yeah.
And I think, in my experience, that would make so much stuff so much more productive, because removing complexity is the only thing you can really do to increase productivity. If you put another developer on it, it's not going to be any faster, because then people have to coordinate more, right?
And I can do similar, right, with Thymeleaf, right? I can say, I could do that same model. Hey, here's the front end. Here, plug in the values.
Yeah, that's actually Thymeleaf. Their whole one of their big selling points is that they have natural templates, and that means that when the engine is not running, you can still view the HTML file, and it looks like it's like it would be. Like you can put in fake data, and the Thymeleaf expressions like overrides them. So I didn't use it yet because I've been working alone, so I didn't need that. But that's one of their selling points.
And Jitter says, yes, that's what I love about Thymeleaf. It's a natural HTML page, and that's really why there's Thymeleaf, Groovy templates, Apache FreeMarker, and Mustache. Those are all available on store.spring.io. But that is the reason why I always kind of defaulted to Thymeleaf. Is because
it's the best choice amongst not so good choices, I would have to say.
Jitter says, which is disappointing when looking at newer engines like Pebble. So I think what I'm hearing is Jitter would like to see Pebble. Perhaps.
Yeah, there are a lot better template engines than Thymeleaf. So
I tried to add your screen once. I'm gonna try it again.
I can wait a second. I'll try to do it again.
Let's take a look. Let's see what we can do. There we go. I can see your screen now.
Yeah. So one of the things, so that's on the JTE side. One of the things, like there's these many template engines, and I have to say, speed is not important at all for a template engine, because you have like database connections and all that, and it's way slower than anything. But like you can see here that Thymeleaf is one of the slowest. Doesn't matter, but still it's a thing. And so that's JTE, and I really like the syntax because if you can see that, it's like it's basically writes like Java. You can do if statements, and then you can do property bindings just with these curly braces, and it's very nice. But what also that's the thing with like the Spring Boot, the Spring start.spring.io, all the template engines are pretty. And then like other than Thymeleaf, there all the other ones are like depreciated basically. Like I've looked at the commits for I think FreeMarker or something, and they didn't do a commit like a release for a whole year, and I'm like, yeah, okay, it's probably like finished, but still, they're pretty much depreciated in my opinion. Like other than Thymeleaf, like Thymeleaf is still going strong. But here's another example for JStachio, which is like a Mustache implementation, but the default one on start.spring.io is JMustache. And the thing with JStachio is that it's compile time safe. So you have all like the template engines that use that are being offered on start.spring.io don't use the opportunities we have on the server, because we know we are on the server, so we have types, we have compile time, we can do compile time safety for our templates, and that's the thing.
I see this screen right here, and I have to ask, like, did you ever do any development with JSPs?
No.
Java server pages.
No.
Right? This is where I could pull in all sorts. I could do all sorts of really dirty, nasty things inside of Java server pages. Where's that line? Where's the line? When you have that flexibility to pull in and do Java code, where does that line? What should that line look like in your opinion? Because I've done some very awful things inside of JSPs.
Yeah, so I've looked a bit of JSP. Like I've only know it because everyone I talk was like, "Oh yeah, we did that with JSP," and but the thing is, the difference is that you don't have any state. We just render HTML, and you do that with ifs and loops and property bindings. You don't do anything else. And what you then do is you use so you use Helios, so Hypermedia as the engine of application state for your state. So what you do is you just make a request to your backend, and then you get the current state of the server sent over the wire via HTML. That's the whole thing. Like, because then you don't have all these issues that I think all of you are talking that you have with JSP.
Yeah.
Because it's just the current server state represented via HTML. It's nothing else.
You brought up the whole state. How do you keep track of state? How are you handling state? That was a big problem, right? Well, especially as you try to scale, how do you keep track of state for the millions of users, etc.?
Well, your state is always just represented on your server. Yep. So you don't have any client-side state. So that's the thing. That makes it so much more simpler.
And I think one of the other things, and I'm looking at Jitter Ted in the chat, expecting a response. One of the other things is technology's changed. There was a point in my career where the amount of bytes that you sent over the wire was an important metric, right? The amount of, right? We weren't on megabit lines. There was early in my career, it was dial up and all that kind of stuff. We had to account for that, right? Because even the enterprises didn't have megabit connections in a lot of cases. So we've been allowed to make some of these changes, and we're being allowed to do some more interesting things and send a little bit more data over the wire in order to give us some of these capabilities.
That's one point I heard from like the JavaScript community is like, we sent HTML instead of JSON over the wire, and it's so much worse performing. But the thing is, HTML is not really that heavy. It's just a few bytes basically. Yep. I think it's so little, and Jitter Ted is loving the stream.
Yeah, I mean, this is like. Again, like that's one of the things I like about this is I know that, I picture myself 10, 12 years ago. I know I would have loved to be just a part of this conversation. And I get excited knowing that there's somebody, you're an anomaly this early on in your career, that you're able to go this deep and have these levels of conversations. I get it. But yeah, having Jitter Ted here and having his takes is great. He says, in fact, it's easy to fall into a bit of a trap with Thymeleaf, like using case switch-like statements. I get it. So make the state easy for the front end to interpret is key. Don't do complex expressions there. These are just like good tips. And that's, I think, a tip no matter what you're doing in the front end. Like that's just a statement like, hey, make it easy. And you're gonna give yourself a whole lot of an easier time going forward.
Yeah.
It all depends on Glenn. Says, I actually use Astro.js because it's very close to HTML that I learned 10 years ago. And you have the flexibility to make components, but you don't have to. It's very beginner friendly. So that's something we'll have to take a look at soon.
Actually, Astro is one, like there's this Astro. So that's the Astro server-side rendered JavaScript library or framework, whatever you want to call it. But these three pages, why Astro, MPA versus SPA, and Astro Islands are actually ones I really like people to refer to, because these same concepts that Astro does also apply to server-side rendered HTML with something like Htmx. Because you have the whole I don't need to explain to the JavaScript community that the approach is like good because they do it themselves. And so here actually they call it islands. So for like interactivity, right? You can have this whole Java, you can have this whole Htmx and like swap out, but then you have this the server round trip, right? And the thing is, like with Astro, they do it with JavaScript, right? And the thing is, with something like Spring View component, you can just have interactive JavaScript islands. Actually, they didn't invent it. If you look at the REST dissertation from Roy Fielding, he actually, I think he coined the term code on demand. And basically, you send script tags with your HTML.
Yeah.
That's how you get interactivity. So it's pretty cool how you can do just all the stuff with just simpler stuff.
I'm going to ask another question. Based on that view that we just saw, there's this concept of micro front end. Are you familiar with this concept, micro front end, where your different components, your different APIs are just they only care about their API's display.
Yeah.
This fits into the same bucket inside of my head. Am I on the right track?
Actually not. It's just so what we think is here we just think in like that's the whole thing with the Spring View component library is that you think in components, so as blocks of your website, and you deliver them all at once. What you're thinking about is that that one of these components could live in a other microservice, for example. All right. And you can do that with Htmx as well. But the question is it a good idea, right? Because how big is your component that you need to have a whole different service? Like that's the other discussion I can get into.
Because I'm gonna kind of bring it all around because there was a while where we were dealing with portals. And we had the portal API and the portal spec. So these different apps were sending their UI through this portal spec, which was kind of an evolution of what we had done. We were realizing like, hey, I'm going to have these different apps, but they're all going to be on the same screen. But each app is basically generating its own UI. So it's kind of an evolution of that take.
Yeah.
So you're sharing your screen.
Yeah.
What are you looking at?
So that's my demo application. It's actually available on fullstack.tschuhly.de if you guys in the chat want to have a look at it. I've shared that at Spring.io. And here, what you guys see here is that's a nice thing about server-side rendering. That's the render time of each view component, but it's done with Spring AOP. So we use aspect-oriented programming to track the render time of our components. So we don't need any JavaScript or any of that stuff to like measure that stuff. We can just do that with Spring. And what you can see here, if you look, let's make that bigger. Down here. So what we just talked about is this micro front-end, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what you see here is exactly that. So I'm trying to get it in a nice fitting way. So what you see here is HX sketch. Let me put that up in, here. So what you see here is exactly this this component, right? That's our dashboard view component. And what you do here is exactly this, what you could do with micro frontends, but you don't have to.
Mm-hmm.
And what you do here is you call the endpoint line chart component for this this chart, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the nice thing about that is you can use all the stuff that's available with Spring. And in combination with the Spring View Component library, we can just render components instead of thinking about templates. So with normal MVC, you have to think about, okay, I have a controller, and then I have this data that's in my controller, and then I have this template. And then, for example, with Thymeleaf, you can use nested templates and like use fragments. But then you have to keep off all the properties you use in these templates. And if you change something, you have to change that in every controller, and it gets messy very fast.
Yep.
And that's where Spring View Component, and because what it does is you can define view components. And what they do is they just wrap a template and the data. For example, here, that's the view component for the chart we just saw. And what we do here is we define an API, a type-safe API for our HTML component. For example, here, that's the chart details. And you have the width, the height, and the data, right? And then you return, like each view component exposes a render method. And then you return a view context. And the view context basically holds the data for our template engine to render. And if we look at here, I'm not sure, that's the wrong one. If we look at the HTML, you can see that I'm also using JavaScript, just using it in this little component. So here we have the chart.js library as a script text. So on demand, when that component loads, it loads that JavaScript library because we want to have a nice interactive chart. And what you see here is we just use the details. Here it's called bar chart details. We pass them here into the view context, right? So like that. We pass this bar chart details view property, I call them, into our template engine. And we can access these now. So we have that's JavaScript method. And then we pass in the data from our server into this rendered JavaScript. And that's like the whole thing, all they're doing, right? And the thing is, you can nest these. So in our dashboard view component, you can use this to render the component inside our dashboard. So we just call the chart view component.render method and pass that into our view context, right? And then we can nest this. So request here. So just with this attribute, we can nest the view component inside our other view component.
Yeah.
And because they're all Spring Beans, you can get creative. Like you could use it's all dependency injected. So you could use interfaces. You could do inheritance, some stuff like that. You can get pretty creative with it. So every time I've used it, I've found more use cases for it.
So tell me this. Yeah. I'm looking to do front-end development. I see you're using Tailwind in places, but you've got flexibility. You're not limited here by some certain set of components, right? You can basically pull components from whatever JavaScript UI library you want. Yeah. What is kind of the sweet spot for this tool that you're building? Like, what is the thing that it's really going to help drive and really going to push forward?
So I've been using the Tailwind, as you already mentioned. And I'm also using Alpine.js for client-side interactivity, and then Thymeleaf. But I'm actually don't know if I want to switch over from Thymeleaf to another templating tool. But first, I want to make it compile time safe because Thymeleaf currently isn't. It doesn't check if your model properties are there, right?
Right.
And I can do that with Spring View Component because we have the information, like with this view context, we have the information what variables we can use in our template. So I'm currently working on an annotation processor that scans the template and then checks if this property is actually available, because currently IntelliJ it doesn't work, but it tells me it cannot resolve it. But
interesting.
You can do it.
Very interesting. I'm gonna take this time. This is interesting. Again, there's been a lot of talk, right? You, Josh, Dave, we're all thinking about this, and yeah, everybody's being asked to do a little bit more with less. So having these front end skills, understanding, picking a framework. Again, I think we can all build a UI worthy of getting an MVP out in a dozen different frameworks, but we have some options, and I want to just remind everybody, like, this is Spring Office Hours. We're not here just to feed you information. It's a community. We want you to bring your questions. If you've got questions, we're going to wrap up here in a little bit. But if you've got questions that you'd like to get answered, ask them. We're here. So, Thomas, I'm going to kick it back over to you.
Yeah.
Ginger Ted says, seems like refactorability is a big plus here.
Yeah, you can, because like these components are self-contained. You can refactor, and it changes across the whole application. And if there's an error, like if you change the API, it's all Java or Kotlin, whatever you use, it's all compiled. So your build tool will scream at you if you do something wrong before it gets to production, right?
Which is always good.
Yeah. So the next thing I want to show you is like the Htmx. So what we do here is actually, let me close these. We define an hxget attribute, and we call the line chart component endpoint. And so if we look for that, actually I have to.
Goofy Tavern says, nice feature. Lovely. I'm a junior developer from Hungary. Well, Goofy Tavern, thank you so much for joining and for the feedback. We're trying to help out.
Yeah. So what we now do is we combine the Thymeleaf and Htmx. So here you can see the each attribute, and what that does is loop over the render time label list, it's called here. And these are all component names of our view components that our AOP aspect put into our data store, right? And what it then does is it calls on click, makes an HTTP GET request to the /line chart component endpoint. And what you see when we go here to the component controller, I've called it here, we have defined the scat mapping line chart component. And then we don't have to deal with any templates. We can just call the analytics chart view component, dependency injected, and call the render method and pass the name. And the nice thing is that calls our analytics service and gets the data for this component. So it's all connected. So yeah, exactly. And for example, here you can see another feature of Htmx I've said before is you can trigger on any event. So and here what we do here is we use the index.first. So the first element of our list gets the attribute load and click. So when we load the page, it automatically creates a request for the first element and puts it into our DOM.
Very nice.
And that's what you could do. So all this whole micro front end stuff could do that as well. But I'm not really convinced of it yet. But
this is great stuff. I want to ask you a question. I'm going to be real transparent and a little vulnerable here. If I wanted to take your framework for a spin, what's the one thing that you would have me do to go and exercise it and see how awesome it is? What's an example that you'd have me do?
An example?
An example project. I want to get to learn your project. Give me a task. Give me some homework.
Yeah, so just create a to-do list. To-do list.
To-do list.
And then just do that with HTMX. And I have an example for that.
Okay.
Because I've created an integration for HTMX with Spring View component. So what you can do is you can just re-render the that's the whole stick of it, because you don't need to deal with templates. You can just the JIT is right. It's so much
Getting
easier.
that HTML fragment seems so much easier than getting the JSON and converting it into HTML by letting the front end be like, hey, put this here, put this here. Yes.
I've got a good meme for that. Take a look. Wait, where did I put it? Here. Here. That's the whole thing.
Right.
You remove 2 whole layers from your application, and you can't tell me that's not going to give you productivity benefits, right?
Yeah. It seems like it's a little bit of a cheat code. And I'll be, skeptical for a little bit, like where am I going to run into problems? I don't know yet. But tell me more about this little to-do app that you've built.
Yeah. So what we're doing here is we use Spring View component view actions. And what they do is, because as you've seen before, with the normal Htmx integration, we need to create an endpoint for this component, right? And now we're getting in the fun part. We don't need to do that anymore. Here I can show you the here we have an to do something list, and we can delete these, and they all get generated without any reloads, right? And if you want to have a look, I have in the Spring View component repository, in my test folder, you have a test application that shows you all these features, right? And the view actions is a new feature I'm currently working on. Like, it's already out, but let's the whole framework is still beta, because some stuff will still need to get figured out, and there's bugs and everything. But what I've done here is, you can, in your Spring View component, you can define actions. And what you do here is you just add an annotation. Here it's a post view action. What we do here, it's a method called addItem, and it has a DTO. And this DTO matches the HTML we have in our template. So if we look at it here, let me turn on soft wraps. So what you see here is we have this form that has one input field with the name item. It's tab text. And what we do here is we add an attribute to this form element, and it's called view::action, and with addItem as the attribute. And what that does is connects the addItem to this addItem method in our view component. And here we call the example service addItem to list with our action form DTO item, and then return the render method. And what you see down there, we return the render method, and the render method of our action view component returns the item list, and it gets that from the example service. So it's the current up-to-date state of the server. What are we doing?
Yep.
HTOs. And we loop over this list of items again with HTML, with Thymeleaf attributes. We loop over this list of items. Then we display a value, the text as inside a span. And if we look at the rendered HTML, you can see here in the form before that there was the view action addItem attribute. But what we now did is we rendered them to Htmx attributes.
Yeah.
So here we have an Ajax post because we used the post action. And the endpoint is the action view component / addItem endpoint that's automatically generated for you. It targets the action view component. So that's the parentive, because we have everything inside this one big component. and then we swap the whole element. So what happens here if we let's make DaShaun new item, DaShaun save item.
Yep.
If we go into the network tab, you can see we created a post request to the action view component add item endpoint. Our payload is the form, the form data in our and that matches the form data class in our view component. Mm-hmm. So what you could do here as well, you could compile, you could verify all that at build time, because we have all information available at build time. And then what we get back is our rendered HTML. So that's essentially Helios, because we get rendered back the item, DaShaun.
Yep.
And now the next thing is we want to delete some stuff. We can do that as well, because in each element we also define, so that's where your to-do list comes in. We have a view action, and we can combine that with our Thymeleaf again. So we have a delete view action. And here, as a parameter, we just have an ID. It's an integer. And what we do here is we just put the item key as parameter. Mm-hmm. And that also creates Htmx attributes. So here we have an hx delete with delete item and the parameter ID 5. And that swaps them out. And I think no, I'm not gonna call my own stuff genius, but it's pretty nice, I gotta say.
It's nice for a lot of things.
Yeah.
And when you do that, but that whole component is getting rendered on the back end and sent to the front end, you don't have to do the match of the JSON to the object.
Yeah.
So there's a question here. I put the link to Spring View component. I put that link up, and Ahmed says, "Hey, just a question. When you change your route, does the whole page reload, or just the part that changes?"
So currently, the whole page gets refreshed, but Htmx has a... Oh, that's not good. But Htmx has also an hexecute attribute that can that all your normal page reloads will get what's it called? Will get intercepted, and they're just going to be AJAX requests. So you can have the whole SPA experience. But what there's also, so if you want to check Htmx more out, it's on htmx.org. And I have two things. One thing I'm gonna go. I'll show you because they have a lot of these essays. And where is it? Okay, I'll have to. I can show you some other time. But there's this. You can actually have this with persistence. So you can have a persistent element. Persistent element. So you can have that where. I can't find it now. You can have it that, for example, you have a video playing on your page. Mm-hmm. And then you make a request to your backend and change to another page. But on that page, the element is still there.
Yep.
And you can do it that the video keeps playing with HTMX, with server-side rendering, everything.
Well, that's great.
Yeah.
Thomas, thank you so much. We're running into time here. But there's one more thing that's on my mind. And, it's something that I've been talking about a lot. The Spring Academy.
Yeah.
You've used it. You've had fun with it.
Yeah.
You're doing good things. You finished it and you got your certification.
Yes.
And I've just been telling the story, like you're part of this Spring Office Hours community. You did it. Give me the 30-second summary. Your thoughts on Spring Academy.
My thoughts on Spring Academy. I've learned a lot about the Spring framework, especially like all the internals, what I didn't know yet. So I've mostly done because I've been using Spring Boot since I think end of 2019. So I've been using it for a long time already. but I've still learned a lot. Like from Sergey, the course about the Spring Framework, you've learned a lot about AOP and all that stuff, the internals, the dispatcher servlet that was very handy when I was using when I've been building the Spring View component library. So, yeah.
So good. Thumbs up, you'd say?
Yeah.
Well, good.
Thumbs
I'm
up.
happy to hear that. It's something I recommend to a lot. I've been getting a lot of other good feedback on it too. So Spring.Academy, if you get a chance, there's a lot of free stuff, but there's also the paid option, which gives you the voucher to take the test, just like my friend Thomas did here. Thomas, thanks again so much.
Thank you for inviting
joining
me
today. And different time, but this will still roll out on the podcast, and we're having good stuff. Is there any last thoughts you want to share before we drop?
Thank you, everyone. It's always nice to be here in this community. It's awesome how you get to interact with you. It's like superpower.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. And until next time, we'll see everybody. Take care.
Yeah.
Bye.
Everybody. Bye. See you next time.